The night it all began, the desert was singing. Most people wouldn't hear it. They'd drive through the emptiness of southern Arizona and hear only silence, broken occasionally by the groan of wind through canyon walls or the distant howl of a coyote. But Marcus Webb had lived here his whole life, and he knew the desert had a voice, a low, thrumming frequency that vibrated through rock and sand, older than memory, patient as stone. That night, though, the song was different. Higher pitched, almost urgent. Marcus was closing up his garage when he first noticed it. Webb's Auto Repair sat on the edge of Route 86, halfway between Tucson and nowhere. A squat cinderblock building with a faded sign and 2 gas pumps that hadn't worked in a decade. It wasn't much a single bay. Shelves lined with parts scavenged from junkyards. A small office that smelled like motor oil and burnt coffee. But it was his, inherited from his father, who'd inherited it from his father before him. 3 generations of Webbs had kept broken-down vehicles running in this stretch of desert, and Marcus had no intention of being the one to break the chain. He was 52 years old, lean and sun-weathered, with hands permanently stained black from grease, and a face lined by decades of squinting into harsh sunlight. He'd never married, never left Arizona, never wanted much beyond the simple rhythm of fixing what was broken and sending it back into the world. Some men dreamed of cities and adventures. Marcus dreamed of a perfectly rebuilt engine purring to life after weeks of patient work. It was enough, or at least it had been. Lately, though, something had shifted in him. A restlessness he couldn't name. He'd wake at 3 in the morning with his heart racing, feeling like he'd forgotten something crucial but unable to remember what. He'd stand outside his trailer, park behind the garage, and stare at the stars, feeling their weight press down on him like a question he didn't know how to answer. The desert had always been his church. Under that vast sky, he'd felt small but connected, part of something larger than himself. His father used to say the stars were God's way of reminding people they weren't the center of the universe, that there were mysteries too big to fit inside the human mind. Marcus had liked that idea. It made faith feel less like rules and more like wonder. But lately, even the stars felt different, closer, more watchful. That night, October 3rd, he'd spent the day working on a transmission for old Pete Hernandez's truck. The gears had been ground down to nothing, and finding replacements for a 1987 Ford wasn't easy. He'd finally tracked down the parts from a salvage yard in Phoenix, spent 6 hours installing them, and gotten the truck running just as the sun started its descent toward the mountains. Pete had been grateful, pumping his hand and promising to pay by the end of the week. Marcus had nodded, knowing Pete's promises were as reliable as the desert rain. They'd come eventually. Just not when you expected, but that was fine. Out here, people helped each other because they had to be. Money was important, but it wasn't everything. After Pete drove off, Marcus had cleaned his tools, swept the garage, and locked the bay door. The sun had set, leaving the sky painted in deep purples and oranges that gradually faded to black. He'd stood there for a moment, breathing in the cooling air, when he'd heard it. The song, it came from the north, beyond the scrub brush and tumbled rocks, out where the desert opened into emptiness. A high, clear tone, almost metallic, vibrating at a frequency that made his teeth ache. He'd turned toward it, frowning, trying to place the sound. Not an anemo, not a vehicle, something else. Then he'd seen the light. It was faint at first, just a pale glow on the horizon, like dawn arriving 12 hours early. But it moved wrong, dipping and weaving, pulsing with a rhythm that matched the strange song. Marcus watched it for a long time, his heart beginning to pound. Every rational part of his brain said it was a plane, a helicopter, maybe military flares from the base over in Yuma, but his gut said otherwise. The light descended slowly, disappearing behind a ridge about 2 miles out. The song cut off abruptly, leaving a silence so complete it felt like the world had been unplugged. Marcus stood frozen, his breath shallow, every instinct screaming at him to get in his truck and drive in the opposite direction. Instead, he grabbed his flashlight, his toolbox, and started walking. The desert at night was a different world. Shadows pooled in crevices, and every sound, the skitter of a lizard, the rustle of wind through creosote bushes, seemed amplified. Marcus picked his way carefully over rocks and around cacti, his flashlight beam cutting a narrow path through the darkness. The stars overhead were impossibly bright, the Milky Way a river of light flowing across the black. He'd been walking for maybe 20 minutes when he crested the ridge and saw it. The ship, because what else could it be, sat in a shallow basin half buried in sand. It wasn't sleek or metallic like the UFOs in movies. It looked organic, almost grown rather than built, with smooth curves that caught the starlight and reflected it in iridescent patterns. Blues and greens and purples rippled across its surface like oil on water. It was maybe 30 feet long, roughly oval, with no visible seams or panels or windows, and it was damaged. Marcus could see the gash along its side, a jagged tear that exposed something inside, not wiring or circuitry, but something that pulsed with faint bioluminescence, like wounded flesh. Dark fluid leaked from the wound, pooling in the sand and evaporating into steam. His hands started shaking. His mind struggled to process what he was seeing, to fit this impossible thing into a framework that made sense. But sense had stopped mattering the moment he'd crested that ridge. He took a step forward, then another. The air around the ship felt charged, like standing too close to a power line. His hair stood on end. His skin prickled. But he couldn't stop moving. When he was 10 feet away, part of the ship's surface rippled and opened. Not like a door, but like skin parting, and something stepped out. Marcus dropped his toolbox. The being was tall, maybe 7 feet, and impossibly slender, with limbs that moved fluidly, as though its joints could bend in any direction. Its skin, if it was skin, shifted between translucent and opaque, revealing glimpses of light moving beneath like slow lightning. It had a head vaguely humanoid in shape, but no face Marcus could distinguish, just a smooth surface that caught and reflected light. They stood there, human and alien, staring at each other across the sand. Marcus's heart hammered so hard he thought it might explode. Every cell in his body screamed at him to run, but he couldn't move. He could barely breathe. Then the being did something unexpected. It knelt, not in submission, but in what Marcus somehow recognized as a gesture of respect, of acknowledgement. One long hand reached out, palm up, finger spread, a universal gesture that transcended species. Asterisk, I mean no harm. Asterisk, Marcus swallowed hard. His mouth was dry as dust. You, ... okay? The question sounded absurd, even as he asked it. But what else do you say to a crashed alien? The being didn't respond with sound. Instead, Marcus felt something brush against his mind. Not invasive, but gentle, like a whisper at the edge of hearing. Images flickered through his consciousness. The ship damaged by something, struggling to land, systems failing. It need that help. Marcus blinked, trying to process the fact that he was apparently receiving telepathic communication from an extraterrestrial being. His brain wanted to shut down, to reject this entire situation as impossible. But Hansi's blessed practical hands that had fixed 10,000 broken things knew what to do. He bent down, picked up his toolbox, and walked toward the ship. "Let me see what I can do," he said. The being rose gracefully and led him to the damaged section. Up close, Marcus could see that the wound was more complex than he'd thought. The outer layer had been torn, yes, but beneath it was a network of something that looked like veins or conduits, glowing faintly with what he could only describe as liquid light. Some had been severed, others crushed, and the whole system was clearly in distress. He had no idea how it worked. He'd spent his life fixing combustion engines and electrical systems, things built by human hands, according to human physics. This was something else entirely biological, technological, and spiritual all at once. A kind of engineering that existed at the intersection of all three. But he understood broken things. And this was broken. Marcus set down his toolbox and knelt beside the wound. The being watched him, motionless. He reached out slowly, his fingers hovering over the damaged section, and felt warmth radiating from it. Not heat exactly, but energy, alive and aware. "Okay?" he whispered, more to himself than to the being. "Let's figure this out." He started with what he knew. Structural damage first, reconnect what had been severed, support what had been crushed. He used wire from his toolkit to carefully bind several of the damaged conduits together, working by instinct more than knowledge. As his hands moved, something strange happened. The ship responded. Where he touched it, the surface seemed to recognize his intent and began to heal itself around his repairs, incorporating his crude wire and tape into its own structure. It was like working with living tissue that understood what he was trying to do and helped him do it. Marcus worked for hours, lost in the rhythm of diagnosis and repair. He forgot where he was, forgot the impossibility of what he was doing. There was only the problem and the solution, the broken thing and the fixing of it. His father had taught him that every machine had a logic, a language, and if you listened carefully enough, it would tell you what it needed. This ship was no different. It spoke to him through warmth and coolness, through resistance and yielding, through the way the light pulsed faster when he did something right and dimmed when he didn't. He learned its language as he worked, his hands moving with increasing confidence. Finally, as dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, he sat back on his heels. The wound wasn't perfectly healed, but it was stable. The severed conduits were reconnected, the crushed sections supported, the leak sealed. The ship hummed softly, a sound of satisfaction, and the bioluminescence beneath its surface glowed brighter. Marcus was exhausted, his hands trembling, his back aching, but he felt something else to a deep satisfaction, a rightness, as though he had just completed the most important repair of his life. The being had remained motionless throughout, watching. Now it moved closer, and Marcus felt that gentle touch against his mind again. This time, the sensation was stronger, clearer. Asterisk gratitude, recognition, respect. Asterisk. Then the being's hand reached out and touched the center of Marcus's forehead. The world exploded into light. Marcus wasn't in the desert anymore. He was everywhere and nowhere, floating in a vast space that was simultaneously infinite and intimate. Around him, he saw Earth, but not as he'd ever seen it before. It was layered, multidimensional, existing simultaneously in physical form and as something else, a web of light and consciousness. Threads connecting every living thing, from the smallest bacteria to the largest whale, all pulsing with the same fundamental frequency. Asterisk, this is what you are. Asterisk, the being's voice said in his mind, clear as crystal. Asterisk, not bodies walking on a rock, but light-wearing flesh. Consciousness exploring itself through form. Asterisk. Marcus tried to speak, but had no mouth. He tried to reach out, but had no hands. He was just awareness, just presence, floating in the truth of what he'd always been but had forgotten. Then the vision shifted. He saw time not as a line, but as a sphere, every moment existing simultaneously. Past, present, future, all woven together in a pattern too complex for linear understanding. And within that pattern, he saw a figure, a man, radiant, walking through history in 1,000 forms. Sometimes recognized, often not. Teaching, healing, dying, returning, teaching again. The same presence, wearing different faces, speaking different languages, but always delivering the same message. Asterisk, remember what you are. Remember love. Remember home. Asterisk. Asterisk, Jesus. Asterisk, Marcus thought, though the name felt inadequate for what he was seeing. The being he'd known from Sunday school, from Bible stories, from his grandmother's prayers. This was that being, yes, but so much more. Not separate from humanity, but the fullest expression of what humanity could be. Not God made flesh, but flesh remembering it was God. Asterisk, he is one of us. Asterisk, the alien's voice said. Asterisk, a messenger, a guide, one who crossed the threshold and returned to show others the way. Your species calls him by many names, but his function is universal. Every civilization that reaches a certain point receives such guides. Asterisk is he. Marcus couldn't finish the question. Asterisk, he is light, as you are light. The difference is that he remembered fully while most of you still sleep. But the awakening approaches. The time of his return draws near. Asterisk, the vision shifted again, and Marcus saw something that made his soul tremble. A day, future, but close, so close he could almost touch it. When the veils between dimensions would grow impossibly thin, he saw the sky split open, not with clouds parting, but with reality itself becoming translucent, revealing what had always been hidden behind it. He saw beings of light descending, millions of them, and humans ascending. Not flying, but shifting frequency, their bodies becoming luminous as they remembered what they'd always been. And at the center of it all, he saw Jesus, or the being he'd known by that name, standing at the threshold, arms spread wide, welcoming everyone home. Not judging, not separating sheep from goats, simply holding space for the great remembering, for the harvest of consciousness that had been planted thousands of years ago and was finally ripening. Asterisk, this is what approaches. Asterisk, the voice said. Asterisk, not an ending, but a transformation. Not destruction, but revelation. The return is not a punishment, but a homecoming. He comes not to condemn, but to gather, to harvest the light that has been growing in the darkness. Asterisk, Marcus saw it all, the chaos that would precede the shift. As old systems crumbled and people clung desperately to what they'd known, the fear, the resistance, the violence of those who refused to let go. But also the awakening, the spontaneous, remembering, happening across the planet. People suddenly seeing the truth, their hearts cracking open, their consciousness expanding. He saw natural disasters, earthquakes, floods, fires, not as divine punishment, but as Earth herself shifting frequencies, shedding the dense energies that could no longer exist in the new vibration. He saw technology failing as the electromagnetic fields changed. He saw governments collapsing as authority structures based on fear lost their power. But through all the chaos, he saw the guides, beings like this one, and humans who'd awakened early, holding space, offering comfort, helping others navigate the transition. Asterisk, the tribulation is not punishment. Asterisk, the voice explained. Asterisk, it is birth. And all births involve pain as the old form breaks to allow the new to emerge. But on the other side is life beyond what you can imagine. Unity beyond separation. Love beyond fear. Existence in conscious awareness of the divine nature of all things. Asterisk when Marcus managed to think. When will this happen? Asterisk. Soon. The signs are already visible to those who know how to see. The frequency of Earth is rising. Time is accelerating. What took millennia before will take decades. What took decades will take years. Before your life ends, Marcus Webb, you will witness the return. And you will have a choice to cross the threshold with those who are ready, or to remain in the old frequency until you are ready. Asterisk, what determines readiness? Asterisk, love. Only love, not belief or behavior or religious affiliation. Simply the capacity to love yourself, others, all of creation, without condition. That is the frequency of the divine. That is the key. That opens the door. Jesus returns for those who have learned to love as he loved, and his return will awaken that capacity in millions who didn't even know they possessed it. Asterisk, the visions came faster now. Overwhelming Marcus with information he couldn't possibly retain consciously, but which was being written directly into his soul. He saw the new Earth that would exist after the shift, not a different planet, but the same planet at a higher frequency, where consciousness and matter danced together in full awareness. He saw humanity transformed, some ascending to that new Earth, others remaining in the old frequency to continue learning the lessons they needed. He saw that there was no hell except the hell of separation from love, and even that was temporary, a choice that could be unmade at any moment through forgiveness and surrender. He saw that every soul would eventually return home, because home was not a place, but a state of being that could never truly be lost, only forgotten. And he saw his own role in what was coming. Asterisk, you are a bridge. Asterisk, the being told him. Asterisk, as you repaired my vessel, you will repair the vessels of those who come to you, not their machines, but their hearts, their souls, their capacity to believe in something beyond what their eyes can see. You will prepare them for what approaches not through preaching, but through presence, not through doctrine, but through demonstration. Asterisk, I'm just a mechanic, Marcus protested. Exactly. You fix what is broken. And humanity is broken, separated from itself, from nature, from the divine. But separation is not a permanent condition. It is simply forgetting, and forgetting can be undone. You will remind people how to remember. That is your gift. That is why you were chosen to find me tonight. Asterisk, the visions began to fade, and Marcus felt himself being pulled back into his body. The last thing he saw was Jesus standing at some future threshold, looking directly at him across time, smiling with infinite compassion. Asterisk, tell them, I am coming. Asterisk, the present said. Asterisk, not to punish, but to celebrate, not to destroy, but to fulfill. Tell them the kingdom of heaven is not a place they go to after death, but a frequency they tune into while alive. Tell them I never left, that I have been walking among them always, wearing 10,000 faces, speaking through every act of love. Tell them to prepare not by fearing, but by loving. That is all. That has always been all. Asterisk, then Marcus was back in his body, gasping, tears streaming down his face, the alien's hands still touching his forehead. The sun had risen fully now, painting the desert in shades of gold and amber. The ship hummed softly, healed enough to function. The being removed its hand and stepped back. Marcus sat there in the sand, trembling, his mind struggling to hold the enormity of what he'd just experienced. The alien moved toward its ship, then paused and turned back. One more thought entered Marcus's mind. Asterisk, you will doubt what you have seen? That is natural. The human mind resists truth that threatens its understanding of reality. But the visions have been written into your soul. When the time comes, you will remember, and you will speak. And those who are ready will hear. Asterisk, then the being entered the ship. The wound Marcus had repaired glowed briefly, fully healed now, integrated. The ship rose silently, effortlessly, hovering for a moment as if in farewell. Then it shot upward, becoming a point of light that quickly vanished into the morning sky. Marcus sat in the empty basin for a long time after it was gone, the sun warm on his face, his mind blank with awe. Eventually, He gathered his tools and walked back to the garage. Every step felt surreal, as though he were moving through a dream he hadn't yet woken from. When he reached his trailer, he collapsed on the couch and slept for 16 hours straight. The dreams that came were overwhelming, layer upon layer of visions, teachings, and revelations he couldn't consciously process, but which sank into his subconscious like seeds being planted in fertile soil. He saw Jesus in 100 forms throughout history. He saw the web of light connecting all souls. He saw the future earth, luminous and healed. He saw his own hands, glowing as they touched broken things and made them whole again. Not just machines, but people. When he finally woke, it was evening. The garage was closed. He'd missed an entire day of work, but he felt no anxiety about it. Something fundamental had shifted in him. The restlessness that had plagued him for months was gone, replaced by a deep certainty he couldn't explain but couldn't deny. He knew things now. Not intellectually, but in his bones, his blood, his soul. He knew Jesus was real. Not in the way the preachers described, but more real than that, deeper than that, truer than that. He knew the return was coming, not as Judgment Day, but as Awakening Day. He knew his role was to prepare people, not through warning, but through presence, through the simple act of showing up with love and fixing what was broken. Over the following days, Marcus tried to return to his normal routine. He opened the garage, worked on the vehicles, people brought him, made his simple meals, went to bed early, but everything felt different now. He could see things he'd never noticed before. The way light moved through objects, the subtle aura around living things, the threads of connection between people, whether they knew each other or not, and people started coming to him. Not just with broken cars, though those came to, but with broken lives, broken hearts, broken faith. They would pull into his lot, ostensibly needing an oil change or a new battery, but they'd linger, talking, opening up about problems that had nothing to do with engines. Marriages falling apart, kids on drugs, crushing loneliness, loss of purpose. And Marcus would listen, really, Lee's son, not offering advice or judgment, just holding space, his presence somehow making it safe for people to be vulnerable. And as they talked, something would shift in them, not dramatically, but subtly, like a door opening a crack to let in light. Some called it therapy, some called it friendship. Marcus knew it was something else. The light he carried, touching the light in them, reminding them they weren't separate, weren't alone, weren't hopeless. One afternoon in late October, a woman named Elena Cortez pulled in with a smoking engine. She was in her 30s, exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes and hands that trembled as she handed him her keys. "I think it's the radiator," she said. "Or maybe the head gasket, I don't know. I just need it to last another 6 months until I can afford something better." Marcus popped the hood and immediately saw the problem. A cracked radiator hose, spraying coolant everywhere. Uneasy fix? But when he looked at Elena, he saw something else. A woman holding herself together with pure willpower, stretched so thin she was transparent. "I can fix this today," he said. "Couple hours? Maybe. You want to wait? There's coffee in the office." She nodded gratefully and disappeared inside. Marcus worked slowly, methodically, listening to the desert sing while his hands repaired the hose. When he finished, he found her sitting in his office, crying quietly, a cold cup of coffee untouched on the desk. He sat down across from her without speaking. After a while, she looked up. "I don't know why I'm crying," she said. "I don't even know you." "Sometimes that makes it easier," Marcus said. And then she told him everything, the husband who'd left, the 2 kids she was raising alone, the 3 jobs she worked to keep them fed, the overwhelming tiredness that made her fantasize about just driving away and never coming back, the guilt she felt for even thinking that, the complete absence of joy in her life. Marcus listened, and as he did, he felt that familiar warmth building in his chest, the same energy he'd felt when repairing the alien ship. Without thinking, he reached across the desk and placed his hand over hers. Light poured from his palm into hers. He felt it leave him like water from a spring, and he saw her aura gray and tangled suddenly brighten. Her eyes widened. "What did you... ... I don't know," Marcus said honestly, "but I think you're going to be okay. Not right away, but gradually. Things are going to get better. You're stronger than you think, and you're not alone, even when it feels like you are." Elena stared at him, and in her eyes, Marcus saw recognition, not of him, but of something he carried, something she'd glimpsed in herself and thought she'd imagined. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Just a mechanic," Marcus said. "But I met someone who showed me things, impossible things, true things. And one of the things I learned is that we're all connected. Every hurt one of us carries, we all carry. Every healing one of us experiences, we all experience. You're not suffering alone. Elena. None of us are. She left an hour later with her car fixed and something else fixed as something invisible but essential. A tiny crack in the armor of despair that would let hope seep back in. Word spread. Not through advertising or social media, but through the invisible network of whispers that connected people in small towns. Go see Marcus Webb. I don't know what he does, but you'll feel better afterward. They came in increasing numbers through November and December. Men who'd stopped believing in anything. Women crushed under the weight of expectations. Teenagers terrified of the future. Elderly folks preparing for death and hoping there was something beyond it. Marcus worked on their vehicles and, without ever discussing it directly, worked on them too. Sometimes it was just his presence, his listening. Sometimes he would touch their shoulder or shake their hand, and that energy would flow from him into them. And always, without exception, they left different than they'd arrived. Lighter, brighter, more hopeful, though they couldn't explain why. The visions the alien had shown him played out in his dreams every night, becoming more detailed, more urgent. He saw the return of Jesus with increasing clarity, not a single moment, but a process, a gradual unveiling that had already begun and would accelerate in the years ahead. He saw the signs, climate catastrophes, social upheaval, technological disruption, all of it, necessary chaos as the old world died to birth the new. But he also saw the lights appearing everywhere, people awakening spontaneously, remembering their true nature, becoming beacons for others. The harvest beginning in earnest. He started keeping a journal, writing down the visions, trying to make sense of them. But words felt inadequate for what he'd been shown. How do you describe dimensions that exist beyond the three humans perceived? How do you explain love as a frequency rather than an emotion? How do you convey the truth that Jesus wasn't a man who became God, but a man who remembered he'd always been God and invited everyone else to remember the same thing? The local Baptist church heard rumors about Marcus and what was happening at his garage. Pastor Reynolds, a well-meaning man in his 60s who'd preached the same sermons for 30 years, paid Marcus a visit one December morning. "Folks are saying strange things about you, Marcus," he said, not unkindly, saying you've been healed by God or that you're healing others, saying you're having visions. Marcus continued working on the carburetor in front of him. "People say a lot of things. Are the stories true?" Marcus set down his wrench and met the pastor's eyes. "Would you believe me if I said I met an angel who showed me what's coming?" Pastor Reynolds' expression flickered between hope and concern. "An angel? Something like that?" A messenger. And he showed me things. Jim, things about Jesus, about his return, about what it really means, things that don't match what you preach on Sunday." The pastor's face hardened slightly. "The Bible is clear about the second coming, Marcus. Jesus will return in glory. The dead will rise. The living will be judged. That's the story." Marcus interrupted gently. "But what if the truth is bigger than the story? What if judgment isn't about punishment, but about frequency? What if the separation isn't about good people and bad people, but about awakened souls and sleeping souls? What if Jesus returns not to condemn, but to gather everyone who's ready, and those who aren't ready simply remain where they are until they are?" Pastor Reynolds' face flushed. "That sounds like universalism, Marcus. That sounds like you're saying there's no hell, no damnation, that everyone gets saved eventually. I'm saying hell is separation from love, and separation is temporary because we're all made of love at our core. Even the most damaged soul can remember what it truly is. It just might take longer for some than others. And Jesus isn't coming to punish. He's coming to celebrate with those who've learned to love. That's what I was shown by an angel, by a messenger." "Yes." The pastor shook his head sadly. "I'll pray for you, Marcus. I think you've been deceived. The devil appears as an angel of light. The scripture says, whatever you saw, whatever you think is happening, be careful. Test the spirits. Make sure you're following the true Christ, not a false one after Zilaf." Marcus sat alone in his garage, feeling heavy. He didn't blame Pastor Reynolds. The man was working with the understanding he'd been given, trying to help in the only way he knew how. But Marcus had seen beyond the stories, into the raw truth that preceded and transcended all religious frameworks. And once you'd seen that, you couldn't unsee it. Still, doubt crept in. What if the pastor was right? What if he had been deceived? How could he know for sure? That night, he sat outside his trailer, staring at the stars, and prayed for the first time since childhood, not reciting memorized prayers, but simply opening himself, asking for clarity, for confirmation, for help. The stars pulsed in response, and in his mind, clear as day, came a voice, not the aliens, but the one he'd encountered at the center of the vision, the presence he knew as Jesus. Asterisk, you are not deceived, Marcus. You are awake, and those who are still sleeping will call your awakening deception because it threatens their sleep. But do not let their fear become yours. Continue the work. Fix what is broken. Love what is hurting. And trust that when I return, when the veil falls fully, the truth will be undeniable. Until then, walk in peace. You are doing exactly what you came here to do. ... The doubt dissolved. Marcus went to bed and slept deeply, peacefully, more certain than ever of his purpose. December gave way to January. The desert winter was cold, but beautiful. The sky endlessly clear. The stars brilliant. Marcus's reputation continued to grow, and people continued to come, not just locals anymore, but travelers who'd heard stories, seekers looking for something they couldn't name, broken souls desperate for hope. He worked with them all, fixing their vehicles and, in whatever way he could, fixing their hearts. The light flowed through him more easily now, no longer surprising him when it came. He'd become a channel, a conduit, allowing something larger than himself to work through him. One night in late January, Marcus was locking up the garage when he felt it again. That strange charge in the air, that subtle shift in the desert's song. He looked up and saw lights moving on the horizon. Not one light. Dozens of them. They moved in formation, pulsing in synchronization, descending slowly toward the desert. His heart raced. Were they coming back? Was there more he needed to learn? He grabbed his flashlight and his keys, started to head toward his truck, then stopped. Instead, he simply stood there, arms at his sides, watching the lights descend. They came closer, resolving into distinct shapes, not ships this time, but beings of pure light, floating down from the sky like slow-motion meteors. They landed all around him, forming a circle, their presence overwhelming but not frightening. And at the center of the circle, one figure brighter than all the others appeared. Marcus fell to his knees. He knew, with every fiber of his being, he knew who this was. Not an alien, not an angel, but the presence he'd encountered at the heart of the vision, the consciousness that had walked as Jesus 2,000 years ago and had never truly left. The figure approached, and Marcus felt love so intense it was almost painful. Love without condition, without judgment, without limit. Love that saw every mistake he'd ever made and loved him anyway. Love that knew his doubts and fears and held them gently. Love that recognized him not as Marcus Webb, small and human, but as a soi eterno, an infinite, temporarily wearing the costume of a desert mechanic. A hand touched his head, and visions flooded through him again. But this time, they were specific, personal instructions for the work ahead. Asterisk, the time accelerates. Asterisk, the voice said. Asterisk, more will awaken. More will come to you. Prepare them not for my coming, but for their own transformation. Teach them that I am not separate from them, that what I did, they can do, that what I am, they are. The kingdom is within. The resurrection is within. The ascension is within. Help them remember. Asterisk, how? Marcus whispered, asterisk, the same way you have been. By presence, by love, by fixing what is broken with your hands and your heart. You are a beautiful demonstration of my message. Marcus, humble work done with love is more powerful than grand gestures done with ego. Continue, trust, and know that you are never alone. We walk with you always, seen and unseen, supporting the great awakening. Asterisk, the light intensified, until it was blinding, and Marcus closed his eyes. When he opened them, he was alone in the parking lot of his garage, the stars quiet above him, the desert still. But he was not the same man who'd closed his eyes. He stood slowly, breathing deeply, feeling the weight and the lightness of his purpose settle into his bones. The return was coming. The harvest was underway. And he, Marcus Webb, a simple mechanic in the middle of nowhere, had been chosen to play a role in the greatest transformation humanity would ever experience. Not because he was special, but because he was willing. He locked the garage, walked to his trailer, and opened his journal to a fresh page, and began to write what he'd been shown about the day Jesus would return. Marcus Webb sat at his small kitchen table, the journal open before him, a pen trembling in his grease-stained hand. The trailer was silent except for the hum of the old refrigerator and the occasional creak of metal settling in the cool desert night. Outside, the stars burned with an intensity that felt almost accusatory, as though they were waiting for him to fulfill some cosmic obligation he didn't fully understand. He stared at the blank page for a long time, How do you write about the end of the world when it isn't really an ending? How do you describe the return of Christ when what you've been shown contradicts everything you were taught in Sunday school? How do you find words adequate to contain revelations that transcended language itself? Finally, he began to write, not worrying about grammar or eloquence, just letting the truth pour out of him onto the page in whatever form it took. Asterisk, what I saw tonight. Asterisk, Jesus is coming back. Not someday far in the future, but soon. Within my lifetime, maybe within the next few years. But it's not going to happen the way the preachers say. There won't be trumpets and clouds and people floating up into the sky while everyone else burns. That's the metaphor, not the reality. Asterisk, the return is an awakening, a shift in consciousness, a transformation of frequency. Asterisk, when Jesus returns, it will be like a veil lifting. Suddenly, everyone will be able to see what's always been true, but was hidden, that we are all one consciousness, experiencing itself through billions of perspectives. That separation is an illusion. That love is the fundamental force of the universe. That what we call heaven isn't a place we go after death, but a state of awareness we can access while alive. Asterisk. He showed me that the process has already begun. People all over the world are waking up spontaneously, having experiences like mine, seeing beyond the material world into the spiritual reality that underlies it. The number of awakened souls is reaching critical mass. When enough people remember the truth, the collective consciousness will tip. And the veil will become so thin that everyone, even those who've been asleep, will have to acknowledge it. Asterisk. That's when Jesus returns. Not as a man descending from clouds, but as a frequency, a presence, a consciousness that will become impossible to ignore. Those who are ready, those who've learned to love without condition, to forgive without limit, to see the divine in themselves, and others will recognize him instantly. They'll shift into his frequency effortlessly, like tuning a radio to the right station. Their bodies might stay on Earth, or they might transform into something else. I'm not sure, but they'll exist in a higher dimension, a new Earth, while still being present in this one. Asterisks, those who aren't ready won't be punished or condemned. They just won't see what's happening. To them, it will look like some people disappeared or went crazy or died. They'll continue living in the old frequency, in the old world, until they're ready to shift. It might take years. It might take lifetime. But eventually, every soul returns home. Asterisk, there is no hell except the one we create through separation from love. And even that is temporary. Asterisk, Jesus isn't coming to judge. He's coming to celebrate, to welcome home everyone who's ready, to hold space for the greatest transformation in human history. Asterisk. And somehow, impossibly, I'm supposed to help prepare people for this. Asterisk, Marcus set down his pen, his hand aching. He read what he'd written, and a wave of inadequacy washed over him. It sounded crazy. It sounded heretical. Pastor Reynolds would call it blasphemy. His father would have called it New Age nonsense, dressed up in Christian language. But Marcus knew, with unshakable certainty, that it was true. He closed the journal, turned off the light, and lay down on his narrow bed. Sleep came quickly, and with it, more dreams layer upon layer of instruction, preparation, knowledge being downloaded directly into his consciousness. When he woke at dawn, he remembered none of the specific details, but he felt changed, expanded, as though his soul had grown larger during the night. The work intensified. Through February and into March, people came to Webb's Auto Repair in steadily increasing numbers. Some needed genuine mechanical work, but many came with problems no wrench could fix. Marcus worked with them all, his hands repairing engines and transmissions during the day, his presence repairing something deeper during conversations that stretched long into the evening. There was Thomas Reeves, a rancher in his 70s, whose wife of 50 years had died the previous fall. He came in with a truck that didn't need fixing, sat in Marcus's office for 3 hours, and finally wept for the first time since the funeral. When he left, he looked 10 years younger, the grief still present but no longer crushing him. There was Maria Santos, a high school teacher who'd lost her faith after watching too many of her students get caught up in gangs and drugs. She came seeking a jump start on a dead battery and left with her hope renewed, though she couldn't explain why. There was David Chun, a software engineer who'd driven from Tucson because he'd had recurring dreams about a garage in the desert where someone would answer questions he didn't know how to ask. He arrived skeptical, left in tears, and returned every Sunday afternoon for months to sit with Marcus and talk about consciousness and reality. And the nature of God. Marcus never advertised what he was doing. He never claimed to be a healer or a prophet or anything special. He just showed up every day, opened his garage, and worked on whatever and whoever appeared. But word spread through invisible networks, the way truth always spreads when it's genuine, through whispers and shared experiences, rather than publicity. By April, he was working 12, sometimes 14-hour days. His body ached constantly. His hands were permanently cramped, and he'd lost 15 pounds he couldn't afford to lose. But he couldn't stop. Every person who walked through his door felt like someone he'd been waiting his whole life to meet. Someone whose healing was somehow essential to the larger pattern unfolding. Sarah Mitchell, a woman in her 40s who ran the town diner, started bringing him meals, casseroles, and sandwiches and thermoses of soup because she noticed he was forgetting to eat. She'd been one of the first people to experience the energy flowing through his hands, and though she'd never spoken about it publicly, she'd appointed herself his guardian angel. "You're going to work yourself to death," she told him one evening in late April, setting a plate of enchiladas on his desk. "You can't help anyone if you collapse." Marcus looked up from the carburetor he was cleaning, his eyes redrimmed with exhaustion. "I know, but I can't turn them away, Sarah. I know what they need," she interrupted gently, "but you need rest and food and probably medical attention, though I doubt you'd accept it." She sat down across from him, her expression serious. "Marcus, what's happening to you? And don't tell me nothing. I've known you for 20 years. You're changing. Everyone can see it." Marcus set down his tools and met her eyes. "If I told you I met beings from another world who showed me what's coming, would you believe me?" Sarah didn't even blink. "Yes." He blinked in surprise. "Just like that? Marcus, I watched you touch my daughter's hand last month and somehow make her migraines disappear. Migraines she's had since she was 12 that no doctor could explain or cure. Going just like that." She snapped her fingers. "I don't know what happened to you, but I know it's real. So yes, if you tell me you met aliens or angels or God himself, I believe you." Something in Marcus's chest unclenched. He hadn't realized how much he'd been carrying alone, how heavy the secret had become, and now here was Sarah matter-of-fact and believing, ready to shoulder some of the weight. "They showed me the future," he said quietly, "or a version of it. They showed me what happens when Jesus returns. And Sarah, it's not what we were taught. It's so much bigger, so much stranger, so much more beautiful than anything the church prepared us for." "Tell me," she said. So Heidi, he told her everything: the crash ship, the repair, the visions, the subsequent visitation, the revelations about consciousness and frequency and the Great Awakening. He told her about the separation that was coming, not as punishment, but as natural consequence. Souls sorting themselves according to their vibrational frequency. He told her about his role as a bridge, helping people prepare for the shift. Sarah listened without interrupting, her expression moving from surprise to wonder to something like recognition. When he finished, she sat quietly for a long moment before speaking. "My grandmother used to say something," she finally said. "She was Apache, grew up on the reservation before she married my grandfather. She used to say that every few generations, the spirit world gets close to the human world, close enough to touch. And when that happens, people have to choose They want to stay in the dream of separation or wake up to the truth of connection." She said her grandmother had lived through one of those times back in the 1800s and that another was coming. She looked at Marcus intently. "I think this is it. I think that's what you're experiencing. The worlds are touching again. The veil is thinning," Marcus said, echoing the words the beings had used. "Yes, and you're one of the ones who can see through it." She stood, gathering her purse. "You need help, Marcus. You can't do this alone. Let me organize things. I'll screen people, schedule appointments, make sure you have time to eat and rest. You focus on the work you're meant to do. I'll handle everything else." Before Marcus could protest, she was gone, the door swinging shut behind her. And true to her word, she returned the next morning with a clipboard, a calendar, and a determination that brooked no argument. Within a week, she'd transformed the chaos of Marcus's days into something manageable: scheduled appointments, designated break times, a waiting area set up in the corner of the garage with comfortable chairs and water. The efficiency allowed Marcus to serve more people more effective. But it also meant news of what was happening spread even faster. By May, people were coming from across Arizona, New Mexico, even California. Some drove hundreds of miles, bringing vehicles that barely needed repair, but souls that were desperate for healing. Marcus met with them all, his hands constantly in motion turning wrenches, signing paperwork, touching shoulders, channeling whatever energy flowed through him. The miracles became more frequent and more visible. A man with late-stage ALS walked out of Marcus's garage with his tremors gone, his muscles suddenly responding, his speech clear. His doctor called it a spontaneous remission, a 1 in a million occurrence. The man knew better, A woman brought her teenage daughter who'd been mute since a traumatic assault 2 years prior. Marcus held the girl's hands for 5 minutes, saying nothing, just present. The girl's eyes filled with tears, and then, impossibly, she spoke her first words in 24 months. "I forgive him." A veteran with PTSD so severe he couldn't sleep more than 2 hours a night sat with Marcus for an entire afternoon. They barely spoke, just sat in comfortable silence while Marcus worked on the man's truck. When the sun set, the veteran stood, shook Marcus's hand, and said, "The ghosts are gone." He slept through the night for the first time in 7 years. Not everyone was healed. Not everyone left transformed. Some came hoping for miracles and left disappointed, their skepticism intact, their problems unsolved. Marcus learned not to take the failures personally. Sarah had been right, you couldn't force awakening. You could only hold space for it and trust that those who were ready would recognize the invitation. But the successes, the genuine transformations, were becoming impossible to dismiss as coincidence or a placebo effect. And with visibility came attention. Inerly Junier, reporter from the Tucson Daily Star, showed up unannounced, asking for an interview. Marcus declined politely. The reporter wrote the article anyway, based on interviews with people who'd visited the garage. The headline read, "Desert Mechanic Claims Mysterious Healing Powers Miracle or Fraud." The article was skeptical but not hostile, presenting Marcus as either a sincere believer experiencing a psychological phenomenon or a clever charlatan exploiting vulnerable people. Either way, it brought more attention, both wanted and unwanted. Religious groups started showing up. Some were supportive, recognizing Marcus as a genuine servant of God working outside traditional church structures. Others were hostile, seeing him as a false prophet leading people astray. One particularly aggressive group from a fundamentalist church in Phoenix staged a protest outside his garage, holding signs proclaiming, "Test the spirits and beware of false miracles." Marcus endured it all with grace and patience. He understood their fear. The world was changing rapidly politically and technologically, and people clung to the familiar, to doctrines and structures that promised certainty in an uncertain world. His message threatened that certainty. He didn't blame them for resisting, but he also didn't stop. One hot afternoon in mid-June, a sleek black SUV pulled into his lot, out of place among the beat-up trucks and dusty sedans. Two men in suits emerged, their movements precise and professional. Marcus recognized the type. Immediately government agents, probably FBI or some similar agency. They introduced themselves as Agent Morrison and Agent Shun, flashed badges, and asked if they could speak with him privately. Sarah, protective as ever, insisted on being present. They conducted the interview in Marcus's small office, the agents sitting with notebooks while Marcus leaned against his desk, arms crossed. "We've received reports about unusual activities at this location," Agent Morrison began, his tone carefully neutral. "Healings, visions, claims of extraterrestrial contact. Can you tell us what's going on here?" Marcus considered his words carefully. "I fix cars. People come. I repair their vehicles. Sometimes we talk. That's it. We've spoken with several individuals who claim you've healed them of serious medical conditions. Conditions documented by physicians. I don't heal anyone," Marcus said truthfully. "If healing happens, it's not me doing it. I'm just present, available. Sometimes that's enough." Agent Shun leaned forward. "Mr. Webb, we're not here to arrest you or shut you down. We're trying to understand what's happening. There are similar reports coming from across the country, ordinary people suddenly displaying extraordinary abilities. Healings, accurate predictions, instances of what some are calling telepathy or remote viewing. The phenomena is accelerating. We need to know if there was a connection." Marcus felt his heart rate increase. He wasn't alone. There were others experiencing what he was experiencing, serving as bridges for the awakening. The harvest was accelerating exactly as the beings had said it would. "What do you think is causing it?" he asked. "We don't know," Agent Morrison admitted. "Some of our scientists think it's a mass psychological phenomenon, a kind of collective delusion brought on by social stress. Others think it might be environmental changes in the Earth's magnetic field affecting human neurology. A few think it's genuine, that something fundamental is shifting in human consciousness." He paused. "And then there are the reports of UFO sightings that have quintupled in the last 6 months. Lights in the sky, craft that defy physics, encounters with entities. Your name came up in connection with one such report." Marcus said nothing, his expression carefully neutral. "We're not asking you to confirm or deny anything," Agent Shun said. "We're just asking you to be aware that you're being watched. Not because you're a threat, but because you might be a resource. If something significant is happening, if there's a genuine phenomenon at work, we need to understand it, for everyone's safety." After they left, Sarah turned to Marcus, her Fosse Polly. They're tracking you. Let 'em, Marcus said. I'm not doing anything wrong. And if they're seeing the same patterns, I'm seeing others awakening, the signs multiplying, then maybe that's part of the plan too. Maybe the authorities need to witness what's coming so they don't panic when it fully manifests. But privately, he felt uneasy. Government attention meant scrutiny, meant his work would be complicated, possibly disrupted. He prayed that night for protection, for wisdom, for the ability to continue serving until his purpose was fulfilled. The answer came in an unexpected form. The next morning, Marcus arrived at the garage to find a woman waiting for him. She was elderly, maybe in her 80s, with silver hair pulled back in a bun and eyes that sparkled with intelligence and something else. She wore simple clothes, carried a worn leather bag, and radiated a peace so palpable it was almost visible. "Marcus Webb," she said as he approached, her voice surprisingly strong. "I've driven a very long way to meet you. Can I help you with your vehicle?" he asked politely. She smiled. "My vehicle is fine. I'm here about something else." She extended her hand. "My name is Ruth Kimmer, and like you, I've seen beyond the veil." Marcus felt that familiar tingle, the recognition one awakened soul has for another. He shook her hand, and the moment their skin touched, he felt that the same energy he carried flowing from her. She was like him, a bridge, a harvester. "Come inside," he said. They sat in his office for hours, trading stories. Ruth had been a college professor of comparative religion before retiring 20 years ago. She'd had her first encounter with what she called the luminous beings in 1987 during a solo camping trip in Yosemite. They'd shown her many of the same truths Marcus had been shown: the interconnectedness of all consciousness, the illusion of separation, the approaching transformation of human awareness. "I've been watching for others," Ruth said. "Those of us who've been contacted, who carried a frequency, who serve as anchors for the new consciousness. There aren't many, but we're scattered across the country, across the world. Most work quietly, like you, helping individuals awaken one at a time. But the time for quiet work is ending, Marcus. The shift is accelerating. Within the next year, maybe two, the veil will become so thin that the awakening will go mainstream. And when that happens, those of us who've been holding the frequency will need to stand together." "Stand together how?" Marcus asked. "As witnesses, as teachers, as living proof that what's coming is real and not to be feared." She reached into her bag and pulled out a worn leather journal, similar to his own. "I've been recording everything for 30 years. The visions, the teachings, the predictions. They told me to document it all, that there would come a time when the records would be needed. I think that time is now." She opened the journal to a page dated 15 years prior. Marcus leaned forward and read, "Asterisk, they showed me the return today, not as a single event, but as a process spanning years. First, scattered awakenings individuals here and there having direct experiences of the divine, then clusters of awakening as those individuals touch others. Then critical mass, when so many have awakened that the collective consciousness tips and everyone begins to see. And finally, the full return to presence becoming so strong, so undeniable that even those who've been resisting will have to acknowledge it. Some will call it the second coming. Others will call it aliens or mass hallucination or the next stage of evil. But whatever they call it, it will be the same event. Humanity remembering what it truly is." Marcus looked up, his eyes widgy. "This is exactly what I've been shown." "Because it's the truth," Ruth said simply. "We're all being given pieces of the same message, shown aspects of the same reality. Individually, we might doubt. Together, we can't deny it." She closed the journal. "There are others, Marcus. I can connect you with them. We need to start coordinating, supporting each other, preparing for what's coming over the following weeks." Ruth did exactly that. She introduced Marcus via phone and video chat to others like Dima Doctor in Seattle, who'd been healing supposedly terminal patients through prayer and touch, a grandmother in Maine who'd been having prophetic dreams for decades, a former soldier in Texas who'd encountered beings of light during a near-death experience in Afghanistan and returned with abilities he didn't understand, a scientist in Colorado whose research into consciousness had been radically transformed by a direct experience of what she called the unified field. They formed a loose network, not an organization, but a communion of souls who recognized each other and could offer support, validation, and shared understanding. They exchanged notes, compared visions, and discovered remarkable consistency in what they'd been shown. All of them had been told the return was imminent. All of them had been shown it would be a shift in consciousness rather than a physical event. All of them had been told their role was to prepare others by embodying the frequency of unconditional love, and all of them had been warned about resistance both from those who would cling to old paradigms, out of fear, and from forces that didn't want humanity to awaken. There are beings who benefit from humanity's sleep, the doctor in Seattle explained during one of their conference calls. Not demons in the traditional sense, but entities that feed on fear, division, suffering. They're not evil, just operating at a lower frequency. And our awakening threatens their food source. Expect increased chaos as we get closer to critical mass. They'll amplify every division, every fear, every reason for humans to turn against each other. Marcus had already been seeing evidence of this. The news was filled with stories of increasing polarization, violence, environmental disasters, political upheaval. Some days it felt like the world was tearing itself apart. It's the death throes of the old consciousness, Ruth explained. Everything that can exist at the new frequency is being purged, brought to the surface to be seen and released. It's painful, but necessary. You can't birth anew without letting the old die. Through it all, Marcus continued his work at the garage, but now he did it with greater understanding and greater urgency. Every person who walked through his door was a soul at a crossroads, consciously or unconsciously choosing which frequency they would embody as the shift approached. Some chose love, forgiveness, compassion, openness, unity. When they did, Marcus could see their light brightening, their energy field expanding. They were tuning into the frequency of the return. Others chose feared judgment, separation, close-heartedness, defensiveness. Their light dimmed, their energy contracted. They were tuning away from the return, not because they were evil, but because they weren't ready. Marcus learned not to judge either choice. Readiness couldn't be forced. Some souls needed more time, more experiences, more suffering even, before they'd be willing to surrender the illusions that kept them asleep. That was okay. There was no deadline, no cutoff. The return would continue for everyone who wanted it in this life, or the next, or the next. But for those who were ready now, Marcus was available. A lighthouse in the desert, a beacon calling them home. Summer intensified, both literally and metaphorically. The desert heat became oppressive, temperatures regularly exceeding 110 degrees. Marcus worked in the stifling garage, his shirt soaked with sweat, his water bottle constantly empty. But the heat was nothing compared to the intensity of the spiritual work. The miracles became more dramatic. A child with leukemia went into sudden remission after Marcus held her hand for 30 seconds. A marriage on the verge of divorce was restored when both partners visited Marcus separately and left with their hearts somehow mended. A man considering suicide walked into the garage and walked out with renewed purpose. Unable to explain what had changed, but certain it had. The protests outside his garage grew larger and more frequent. Religious groups accused him of practicing New Age witchcraft. Skeptics called him a fraud and demanded he submit to scientific testing. Desperate people camped in his parking lot overnight, hoping for a miracle. Sarah managed it all with remarkable grace, but even she was stretched thin. "This is unsustainable," she told Marcus one evening in July. "You need more help. You need a facility, a team, a real support structure." "I'm just a mechanic," Marcus protested weakly. "No," Sarah said firmly. "You're whatever you need to be to serve the work. And right now, the work needs more than a one-man operation in a desert garage." She was right, but Marcus resisted. Something about the humble simplicity of his current situation felt important, felt aligned with the message he'd been given. Jesus had been a carpenter, not a CEO. He'd served in dusty villages, not mega-church auditoriums. The work was supposed to be accessible, unglamorous, rooted in ordinary life. But maybe that was ego talking. Maybe his resistance to expanding was just fear, dressed up as humility. He prayed about it that night, standing under the vast desert sky, asking for guidance. The answer came in his dreams. He saw himself standing in a larger space, not a megachurch, but something simple, open, welcoming. A place where people could come not just for car repairs, but for soul repairs. Where the work could happen more efficiently, but no less authentically. He saw himself surrounded by others, like him, helpers, supporters, fellow awakened souls all working together to hold space for the transformation. Asterisk, you are outgrowing the chrysalis. Asterisk, a voice said in the dream. Asterisk, do not fear the expansion. Stay humble, stay rooted in service, and the form will remain aligned with the purpose. Asterisk, when he woke, he knew what he had to do. Within 2 months, with Ruth's organizational skills and Sarah's local knowledge and donations from people who'd been helped, Marcus had relocated. The new space was a converted warehouse on the outskirts of Tucson, large enough to hold multiple vehicle bays, a comfortable waiting area, private rooms for counseling, and living quarters for Marcus and several volunteers who'd offered to help. They called it the Garage, keeping the name simple and unpretentious. It opened in September, and within days, it was operating at full capacity. Marcus worked alongside 2 other mechanics, both of whom had been drawn to the work, not for the pay, but for the purpose. Sarah ran operations. Ruth offered spiritual counseling. A massage therapist volunteered her services. A counselor donated time. Slowly, organically, a community formed around the work. People came from across the country now, sometimes staying for days, receiving not just a single session with Marcus, but immersion in a community that embodied the frequency they were seeking. Healings continued, transformations accelerated, the light was spreading, but so was the darkness. In October, the garage was vandalized, windows smashed, walls spray painted with accusations of heresy and fraud. Marcus filed a police report but didn't press charges. He understood the vandals were acting from fear, and fear always lashed out at what it didn't understand. A week later, a local television station ran an expose, accusing Marcus of running a cult and financially exploiting vulnerable people. The accusations were baseless. Marcus charged nothing for his services, accepting only donations that barely covered expenses, but the damage was done. His name was now associated with controversy. Maybe we should shut down for a while, Sarah suggested after the broadcast. Let things cool off. Marcus shook his head. No, this is part of it. The resistance Ruth warned about. If we stop it now, we're letting fear win. So they continued, and remarkably, the controversy brought even more people. Those who were genuinely seeking didn't care about television exposes. They cared about truth, about transformation, about the light they sensed in Marcus and his community. By November, the garage was serving over 100 people a week. Marcus was exhausted but fulfilled. Every morning he woke, knowing his purpose. Every night he fell asleep, feeling he'd honored it. Then came Thanksgiving week, when everything changed. Marcus was working alone in one of the bays. Late at night, everyone else had gone home for the holiday, when he felt it, that familiar charge in the air, that shift in frequency. He set down his tools and walked outside. The sky was full of lights, not stars, not planes, ships, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, hovering silently over Tucson, their forms shimmering with that same iridescent quality he'd seen on the first ship. People across the city must have been seeing them, must have been calling 911, must have been panicking, but Marcus felt only peace. He walked to the center of the parking lot and waited. One of the ships descended slowly, landing gently in front of him. An opening appeared, and 3 beings emerged, not the one he'd met before, but clearly related, clearly from the same source. They approached him, and the now familiar telepathic connection opened. Asterisks, the time accelerates. Asterisk, they told Aim. Asterisk, the veil is nearly transparent now. What we show you tonight, you must share publicly. No more working in secret. No more serving only those who come to you. The message must go wide. Humanity must be prepared for what approaches. Asterisk, I don't know how to do that, Marcus said. I'm not a preacher or a writer or asterisk. You are a witness, that is enough. Tell what you have seen. Tell what you know. And those who are ready will hear dot asterisk. Then they touched his forehead, and the visions came more detailed, more specific, more urgent than anything he'd received before. He saw the day of the return, not a specific date, but a threshold, a moment when enough souls had awakened that the collective consciousness of humanity reached critical mass. When that happened, the veil would dissolve completely. Everyone on Earth would suddenly be able to see beyond the material world into the spiritual reality beneath it. For those who've been preparing, who've been learning to love, who've been raising their frequency, it would be the most beautiful moment of their existence. They would recognize Jesus not as a separate being, but as the highest expression of their own true nature. They would see him in themselves and in everyone else. They would understand, finally and fully, that they were all one consciousness, all God experiencing itself through infinite perspective. The transformation would be instant for some. They would shift frequencies so completely that their physical bodies would become luminous, less dense, capable of existing in dimensions beyond the third. They wouldn't disappear, but they would be visible only to others at the same frequency. For others, the transformation would be gradual. They would remain in physical form, but with expanded awareness, serving as bridges between the old earth and the new, helping those still transitioning. And for those who weren't ready, those still deeply identified with fear, with separation, with igedere of the return would be terrifying. They would see the veil lift, see the multidimensional reality, see beings of light all around, and it would overwhelm them. Some would call it demons or aliens or hallucinations. Some would panic, would resist, would try to fight what they were seeing. They wouldn't be punished for this resistance, but they would create their own suffering by refusing to surrender. Eventually, even the resistant ones would have to choose to open their hearts and accept the truth, or to close themselves off completely and descend into denser frequencies where the illusion of separation could be maintained longer. Asterisk, there is no hell except that which souls create for themselves through refusal to love. Asterisk, the beings explained. Asterisk, and even that is temporary. Even the darkest soul eventually returns home, but the journey back can take eons if the resistance is strong. Asterisk. Marcus saw all of this in vivid detail, the moment of collective awakening, the chaos and beauty that would follow the sorting of souls according to frequency, the emergence of the new earth existing simultaneously with the old, two realities occupying the same space but invisible to each other, except that the boundaries were bridges like Marcus stood. And he saw Jesus standing at the center of it all, not judging, not commanding, but simply being, his presence so full of love that everyone who encountered it would be forced to choose, open to it or close against it, accept their own divine nature or deny it, step into unity or cling to separation. Asterisk, this is the return. Asterisk, the being said. Asterisk, not a man coming on clouds, but a consciousness becoming undeniable. Not a rescue mission, but a graduation ceremony. Those who've learned the lessons of love, who've done the work of awakening, will graduate to the next level. Those who haven't will repeat the grade until they're ready. Asterisk, when? Marcus whispered. When does this happen? Asterisk, soon, within 2 years. The signs will multiply, the chaos will intensify, but so will the awakening. More and more people will have direct experiences of the divine, will see through the illusion, will remember who they are, and when the number reaches critical mass 144,000, to use your scripture's symbolic language, the veil will dissolve for everyone. Ready or not? Asterisk, the vision released him, and Marcus stumbled, falling to his knees on the asphalt. The being stood silently, holding space while he processed what he'd been shown. Finally, he looked up. Why me? Why was I chosen to carry this message? Asterisk, you chose it. Marcus, before you incarnated, your soul volunteered to serve as a witness to help anchor the new frequency during the transition. Many souls volunteered. You are simply one of many, but each is essential. Each lighthouse helps others find the shore. Asterisk, the beings turned and moved back toward their ship. Before they entered, one final thought came. Asterisk, do not fear the chaos ahead. Do not fear the resistance or the misunderstanding or even your own doubt. Simply continue to love. Continue to serve. Continue to fix what is broken, and trust that every soul you touch ripples out into the collective, helping tip the balance toward awakening. You are doing exactly what you came here to do, and we, the messengers, honor you for it. That asterisk, then they were gone. The ship rising silently into the night sky, joining the others that had already begun dispersing. Within minutes, the sky was empty again, except for stars. Marcus knelt there for a long time, tears streaming down his face. He felt the weight of the revelation and the lightness of purpose simultaneously. In 2 years, maybe less everything would change. The world as humanity knew it would end. Not destroyed, but transformed. And he'd been given the task of helping people prepare. When he finally stood, his legs shaky, he went back inside and called Ruth. They came again, he said when she answered. They showed me the timeline. 2 years. Ruth, maybe less. And they said it's time to go public, to share everything. There was a long pause. Then Ruth's calm voice. Then we share. We document it, all your experiences, mine, the others. We publish it, broadcast it, send it everywhere we can. Some will reject it, some will ridicule it. But those who are ready will hear, and that's all that matters. Over the next few weeks, Marcus wrote down everything he'd been shown, every detail of every vision, every teaching that beings had offered. Ruth compiled similar accounts from the other awakened souls in their network. Together, they created a document part memoir, part prophecy, part instruction manual for the transition. They titled it simply The Return, What to Expect When Jesus Comes Back. They published it online for free, released it as a self-published book, sent copies to news outlets and religious leaders and scientists. Most ignored it. Somi mocked it. But a few those who'd been having their own experiences, their own awakenings, recognized the truth in it and began sharing it with others. The document went viral in unexpected circles. Not mainstream media, but alternative news sites, spiritual forums, conspiracy theory networks. and grassroots religious communities that existed outside traditional church structures. Within 2 months, hundreds of thousands of people had read it, and many of them started making pilgrimages to the garage, wanting to meet Marcus, to verify that he was real, to receive whatever transmission of energy or truth or healing he carried. The garage expanded again. More volunteers arrived. More awakened souls joined the community. More people were healed, transformed, prepared for what was coming, and the signs continued to multiply. UFO sightings became almost commonplace. Governments could no longer deny them, though they still couldn't explain them. Official disclosure seemed imminent. Natural disasters intensified, wildfires, hurricanes, earthquakes not as punishment, but as Earth herself shedding old energies, aligning with the new frequency. Political and social divisions reached fever pitch, as though humanity were tearing itself in half between those evolving toward unity and those devolving toward separation. But simultaneously, reports of spontaneous awakenings increased exponentially. People who'd never been spiritual suddenly having mystical experiences. Children speaking about remembering who they were before birth. Elderly people losing their fear of death as they glimpsed what lay beyond. Healings happening through ordinary people who didn't understand their own abilities. The harvest was accelerating exactly as the beings had predicted. Marcus worked harder than ever through the spring of the following year. Knowing time was short, every person he touched, every soul he helped awaken, was one more light added to the growing constellation that would tip humanity toward collective transformation. But he was also preparing himself because he knew with absolute certainty that when the veil finally dissolved, he would be one of the first to shift frequency. His body was already less dense, already vibrating at a higher rate. Some days he could see through his own hands if he looked at them in a particular way. He was becoming translucent, becoming light. It didn't frighten him. It felt like coming home. One evening in June, Marcus stood outside the garage, watching the sunset paint the desert in impossible colors. Sarah came and stood beside him, silent for a long time before speaking. "You're leaving soon, aren't you?" she said quietly. He nodded. "Not by choice, but yes. When the shift comes, I don't think this body will be able to hold both frequencies. I'll move fully into the new earth. Will I see you again? If you're ready to shift too, yes. If not yet, then eventually. But Sarah, you'll be fine. You're already awakened. You'll be a bridge for others when I'm gone." She wiped tears from her cheeks. "I'm going to miss you. I'm not going anywhere," Marcus said gently. "I'll just be at a different frequency. Like a radio station you can't hear anymore with your old receiver. But that's still broadcasting. When you upgrade your receiver, you'll pick up the signal again." They stood together until the last light faded from the sky and stars emerged in their billions. Somewhere out there, among those stars, beings who'd once been human lived in frequencies of consciousness humans were only beginning to imagine. And soon, very soon, humanity would join them. The day came in September. Marcus felt it before he saw Ita, a sudden shift in the baseline frequency of reality, as though someone had turned a dial and everything was suddenly vibrating higher. He walked outside, and the sky was different. Not a different color, but more dimensional, more alive, as though he could see depth that hadn't been visible before. And then he saw them, beings of light, everywhere, walking among humans who couldn't see them. Standing in doorways, sitting in cars, moving through walls. Guides, guardians, messengers who'd always been present but invisible were suddenly visible to him, and in the distance, growing brighter by the moment, a presence so vast and luminous that Marcus knew without doubt who it was. Jesus was returning, not descending from physical clouds, but ascending from within human consciousness, the veil between dimensions, finally dissolving. The frequency of Christ consciousness becoming accessible to everyone simultaneously. Marcus felt his body beginning to shift. Lightness filled him. His cells vibrated faster. He was becoming less solid, more luminous. Around him, others at the garage who'd been preparing were shifting to Ruth. Several of the volunteers, their bodies beginning to glow. The ones who weren't ready yet looked confused, frightened. They could feel something happening, but couldn't see what. Marcus went to them, touched them gently, and spoke words of comfort. "Don't be afraid. Something beautiful is happening. You'll understand soon. Just stay open, stay loving. That's all you need to do." Then Marcus walked out into the desert, away from buildings and people, to meet the presence he'd been serving for the last 2 years. The light was overwhelming now. Not painful, but intense, beyond description, and within it a figure human-shaped but radiant, made of love so pure, it was almost unbearable. Asterisk Marcus Webb. Asterisk the presence said. And hearing his name spoken in that voice made him weep. Asterisk. Well done, good and faithful. You have prepared many for this moment now. Call me home. Your work in that form is complete. Asterisk Marcus felt his last attachments to physical form dissolving. His body was light now, barely cohesive. But he wasn't afraid Haiwa's. Lord, he whispered, was it real? Did I do enough? Asterisk, it was real. You did what you came to do. And now you ascend, not away from earth, but into its highest expression. The new earth, where love is the only law and separation is impossible. Come, see what you helped create. Asterisk Marquise's awareness expanded. He could see the earth from above and within simultaneously. He saw the two realities now occupying the same space, the old earth, still dense, still caught in cycles of suffering, still home to souls who weren't ready to shift, and the new earth, luminous and light, home to those who'd learned to love. Both were hail. Both would continue. Those ready for one would experience one. Those ready for the other would experience the other. And bridges would exist between them for those still transitioning. Asterisk, this is the return. Asterisk, the presence of Christ said. Asterisk, not ending, but transformation. Not separation, but sorting. Not judgment, but choice. Everyone chooses. Marcus, everyone creates the reality they're ready for. Your role was to help some choose love, and because you did, the light spreads. Every soul you touched now touches others. The ripples continue. The harvest grows. Asterisk Marcus's consciousness expanded beyond the ability to hold individual identity. He was Marcus, yes, but also more than Marcus. He was part of the vast communion of awakened souls, the body of Christ in its truest sense, not a church or a religion, but a frequency of consciousness that spanned dimensions. And somewhere in the reality he just left, people were waking up to find Marcus Webb gone. His body, discovered in the desert, would be examined and found to have simply ... stopped. No disease, no injury, no explanation, just a cessation, as though he'd stepped out of it the way you'd step out of old clothes. Some would call it death, but those who'd known him, who'd been touched by him, who'd seen the light he carried, would know better. He hadn't died. He'd graduated. And the work he'd started would continue through everyone he'd awakened, everyone he'd touched, everyone who'd seen in him a glimpse of what they too could become. Because the return of Jesus wasn't about one man coming back. It was about humanity remembering collectively. What Jesus had remembered individually, that we are all divine, all light, all love, wearing temporary costumes of flesh. And once enough people remembered, the kingdom of heaven wouldn't need to come. It would simply be revealed as what it had always been. Here, now, within truth or fiction. Perhaps even the one who told this story no longer knows. Here, stories exist not to convince, but to awaken. The miraculous reveals itself only to those who feel, never to those who demand proof.